Welcome to another episode of Mastering Cybersecurity, developed by baremetalcyber.com. Let's dive in.
The word exploit is often used as though it means the same thing as vulnerability, attack, or breach, but those terms describe different parts of a security problem. A vulnerability is the weakness, while an exploit is the method used to take advantage of that weakness. An attack is the broader action taken against a system, and a breach is one possible result when defenses fail and protected information or resources are exposed. Mixing these ideas can lead to poor decisions, such as treating every scanner finding as an active attack, or assuming that a published weakness can always be abused immediately. In this episode, we will answer a practical question. What makes something an exploit? And why does the existence of a vulnerability not automatically mean that a reliable exploit exists? By the end, you should be able to separate the weakness from the technique, judge what exploitability really means, and use that distinction when prioritizing defensive action. An exploit is a technique, sequence of actions, or piece of code that causes a vulnerability to produce an unintended result. The vulnerability is the condition that makes the result possible, while the exploit is the means of triggering or abusing that condition. The result may be unauthorized access, execution of unintended commands, disclosure of information, interruption of service, or some other violation of the system's expected behavior. These concepts are closely related, which is why people often collapse them into one word, but they answer different questions. A vulnerability asks, what is weak or incorrect in the system? An exploit asks, how can that weakness be used in practice? Keeping the distinction clear helps defenders evaluate evidence, communicate accurately, and choose a response that matches the actual problem rather than reacting to an imprecise label. A vulnerability can exist in software, hardware, configuration, design, identity management, or operational practice. It may come from a programming error, an unsafe default, excessive permissions, weak authentication, missing validation, or a trust assumption that does not hold under hostile conditions. The weakness itself does not need to be actively abused in order to exist. A service may contain a memory handling flaw, even when no one has developed a dependable way to trigger it, and an account may have unnecessary privileges, even when no unauthorized action has occurred. Vulnerability discovery therefore identifies a condition, not necessarily an attack path that is ready for use. This distinction matters because vulnerability management begins with evidence that a weakness is present, while exploit analysis asks whether someone can convert that weakness into a repeatable security effect under the conditions that actually exist. The word exploit can refer to code, but it is broader than code alone. Some exploits are programs or scripts that send specially formed input to a vulnerable component, while others depend on a carefully ordered technique, misuse of a feature, or manipulation of trust between systems. The defining characteristic is not the programming language, the length of the code, or whether a tool is automated. The defining characteristic is that the method turns a weakness into behavior the system was not supposed to permit. A malformed request that merely causes an error is not automatically evidence of a useful exploit. It becomes evidence of an exploit when the method uses the vulnerability to create a meaningful, unauthorized outcome, even if the technique is not yet dependable across different environments. That focus on cause and effect helps separate an exploit from a scanner check, a crash report, a theoretical concern, or a general description of how a flaw might matter. Not every vulnerability has a practical exploit, because real systems impose conditions that can block, limit, or destabilize the technique. A flaw may be reachable only through a feature that is disabled, exposed only to trusted users, or dependent on a rare hardware or software configuration. The weakness may produce a crash without giving the attacker useful control, or it may behave differently across versions, settings, and operating environments. Modern protections can also make exploitation harder by disrupting the assumptions a technique depends on, even when the underlying flaw remains present. In other cases, researchers may understand that a vulnerability could be dangerous, but lack a reliable method for turning it into a repeatable result. Practical exploitability, therefore, depends on more than the existence of a bug. It depends on access, conditions, control, consistency, and the value of the outcome that can actually be achieved.
Exploitability is best understood as a set of prerequisites rather than a simple yes or no property. The technique may require network access, a local account, prior authentication, specific privileges, user interaction, or knowledge that is difficult to obtain. It may depend on a particular configuration, a narrow timing condition, or a component that is reachable only from another compromised system. These requirements do not erase the vulnerability, but they change who can use it, how easily it can be used, and what defenses stand in the way. A remote exploit that works before authentication usually creates a different exposure from a local technique that requires an existing account with significant access. Defenders should therefore ask what must already be true before the exploit can succeed. Those preconditions often determine whether the issue demands immediate emergency action, planned remediation, or additional monitoring while a permanent fix is prepared.
Exploit development also moves through levels of maturity. A researcher may first demonstrate that a flaw can be triggered, which proves the weakness is real, but may not produce a controlled or repeatable security outcome. A proof of concept may then show that exploitation is possible under defined conditions, yet still require manual adjustments, crash frequently, or work only in a laboratory environment. A more mature exploit is dependable across realistic targets, handles environmental differences, and produces a useful result with less uncertainty. Weaponization goes further by packaging the technique for operational use, often making it easier to deliver, repeat, or combine with other capabilities. These stages should not be treated as guarantees that an attack will occur, but they do change the defensive picture. The closer an exploit moves toward reliable and accessible use, the less time defenders can safely assume they have. Before we continue, a brief promotional note. This episode is brought to you by the Bare Metal Cyber Academy. The Academy is a place for people who want to keep developing practical cybersecurity knowledge through clear, structured education that connects technical ideas to real defensive decisions. Understanding the difference between a vulnerability and an exploit is one example of the precision that helps security work become more useful and more credible. Visit baremetalcyber.com to explore the Academy and see the learning opportunities currently available. There are no promises of instant expertise or guaranteed outcomes, just a focused place to continue learning. Now, let's return to the ways exploit characteristics shape how defenders interpret exposure. Several common labels describe the access and conditions an exploit requires. A remote exploit can be used across a network path without the operator already having local access to the target, while a local exploit requires some level of access on the system itself. An unauthenticated exploit works before valid credentials are established, while an authenticated exploit depends on a legitimate or compromised account. Some techniques require a user to open content, approve an action, or interact with a deceptive prompt, and others can be triggered without that participation. These labels do not tell the entire story, but they reveal important barriers between a vulnerable condition and a successful outcome. A local, authenticated exploit may still be serious if it allows an ordinary account to gain powerful privileges. A remote exploit may be less useful when the vulnerable service is not reachable from the networks an attacker can access. An exploit may also be only one link in a longer chain. One technique might provide an initial foothold, another might increase privileges, and a third might bypass a boundary protecting sensitive resources. Each step depends on the result of the one before it, so the complete path can fail when a single prerequisite is removed. This is why defenders should not evaluate every vulnerability in isolation, or assume that one exploit automatically delivers the attacker's final objective. A weakness with limited impact may become important when it enables another technique, while a severe flaw may be difficult to use because the necessary path to it is blocked. Exploit chains show that security outcomes are often produced by connected conditions rather than one dramatic failure. Breaking the chain through segmentation, access control, patching, or reduced privileges can meaningfully lower risk, even when every weakness cannot be removed immediately. Another important distinction is the difference between exploit availability and evidence of exploitation. Publicly available exploit code shows that a technique has been shared, but it does not prove that the technique works against every affected system or that anyone has used it against a particular organization. A vendor advisory may describe possible exploitation without confirming active attacks. A security alert may detect behavior associated with a technique, but the alert still requires investigation to determine what happened and whether the attempt succeeded. Conversely, the absence of public code does not prove that no private exploit exists. Defenders should use careful language that matches the evidence. Saying that a vulnerability is exploitable is different from saying that it is being exploited, and both statements are different from confirming that exploitation succeeded and caused a security impact. The exploit distinction improves prioritization because severity alone does not capture exposure. A technically serious vulnerability may present limited immediate risk when the affected feature is disabled, the system is isolated, or strong prerequisites prevent likely use. A lower severity weakness may deserve faster action when it is easy to exploit, broadly reachable, and connected to something the organization cannot afford to lose. Exploitability should therefore be considered alongside asset value, exposure, existing controls, potential consequence, and signs of active threat activity. This does not mean that difficult-to-exploit vulnerabilities should be ignored. Conditions change, techniques improve, and systems are reconfigured. It means that remediation decisions should be based on the relationship between the weakness, the available method of abuse, and the environment in which that method would have to work. Defensive action can target several parts of that relationship. Patching or replacing the vulnerable component removes or changes the weakness itself. Configuration changes can disable the affected feature, reduce reachability, or remove the condition an exploit requires. Access controls can limit who is able to reach the vulnerable function, while least privilege can reduce what a successful exploit achieves. Monitoring can help identify attempts, failures, or unexpected behavior, but detection does not correct the underlying flaw. Temporary mitigations are useful when a permanent fix cannot be applied immediately, yet they should be documented with their limits so the organization does not mistake reduced exposure for complete resolution. Effective defense comes from knowing whether a control removes the vulnerability, blocks the exploit path, lowers the likely impact, or simply improves the chance of noticing an attempt. A practical way to test your understanding is to describe the issue in 3 separate sentences. First, state the vulnerability as the specific weakness or unsafe condition. Second, state the exploit as the method that could use that weakness, including the access and prerequisites the method requires. Third, state the possible consequence in terms of what the system or organization could lose. Then ask what evidence supports each sentence. A scanner result may support the presence of a vulnerable version. A technical demonstration may support exploitability under certain conditions. And logs or forensic evidence may support a conclusion about attempted or successful exploitation. Separating the statements prevents one fact from being stretched into another. It also makes ownership clearer because the team fixing the weakness, the team blocking the path, and the team investigating activity may have different responsibilities. An exploit is the practical method that turns a vulnerability from a weakness into an unintended result. It may be code, a sequence of actions, or a way of abusing trust, but it must do more than merely identify that something is wrong. The existence of a vulnerability does not guarantee a usable exploit, because real exploitation depends on reachability, prerequisites, environmental conditions, reliability, and the value of the outcome. That is why defenders should distinguish proof of weakness, proof of exploitability, public availability, attempted use, and confirmed success. When those states are described accurately, vulnerability reports become easier to prioritize, incident claims become easier to verify, and controls can be aimed at the right part of the problem. The decision to patch, mitigate, monitor, or escalate should follow from what the weakness permits and what an exploit can realistically accomplish in the environment being protected.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.